летал 4 раза в космос, 3 раза на борту американских шаттлях, и 4-й раз я подготовился с русскими, и старт был из Байконура на борту Союз ТМЛ-5, и мы летал к станцию, и тогда мы были на борту во время 10-й экспедиции МКС, и я был командиром на борту этот полет.
So, as I was introduced, my name is Leroy Chao. I've been a NASA astronaut for 15 years, and I flew 4 missions to space, 3 missions on board Space Shuttle, and the 4th mission on ISS along with my Russian crewmates I trained with. I was a part of the Expedition 10 to the ISS, and I was an expedition commander for that one.
Ну, конечно, полет в космос – это большое приключение, но у нас несколько медицинских проблем, и это очень серьезно иногда.
Of course, missions to space are very interesting, but sometimes we face biomedical problems, and sometimes they are very serious. And Leroy, everyone speaks English, so if you are comfortable doing it in English,
should I do it in English?
Yeah, I think that would be fine.
Okay. So we have experienced biomedical problems during all phases of flight, including launch and ascent, entry and landing, and of course on orbit. And as we started flying longer missions aboard the ISS, we started seeing new problems that we had not seen previously. And of course, as we fly farther from the Earth on longer missions, we will experience even more biomedical problems that we had not anticipated. So as Vika mentioned in the beginning, I did work for a number of years at the National Space Biomedical Research Institute. My training is in chemical engineering, so I'm not a medical doctor. And so my presentation will not be so much from the actual technical medical side. It will be more from the experience of the astronauts and cosmonauts and what we experience when we're in space. And it will be more of a general overview and kind of a personal stories of how this affects us. I'm also still a part of the Baylor College of Medicine. The NSBRI did cease functioning, unfortunately closed about 3 years ago. But the Baylor College of Medicine Center for Space Medicine continues under the directorship of Dr. Jeff Sutton, as you can see here on the left. And he was also the Institute CEO and director of the NSBRI. So I grew up during the 1960s, during the very beginning of the space program, and I followed those early missions with a lot of interest. And the early American astronauts like Alan Shepard, the very first American to fly into space, those were my heroes when I was young. But it really was the Apollo moon missions that captured my imagination and made me start to dream about wanting to be an astronaut myself. At the time of Apollo 11, 51 years ago yesterday, I was 8 years old at the time, and I remember like it was yesterday watching the event live on television and watching as the scene unfolded in the Mission Control Center and the lander, the Eagle, actually touched down on the surface of the moon. And it was so amazing. Even as a young boy, I knew the world had just changed. Later, watching Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin take those first steps on the moon really got me dreaming and made me start to think about wanting to become an astronaut myself. So I worked very hard. I studied engineering. I studied chemical engineering. I earned 3 degrees in chemical engineering. I worked for a while, both in industry and also at a government research laboratory. And then I applied to NASA to become an astronaut. And I was fortunate enough to be interviewed and then actually to get selected. So this was a very long time ago. This was almost exactly 30 years ago, and maybe about 10 kilos ago. 4 years after arriving, I did get to fly my first mission into space aboard American Space Shuttle Columbia. And this was really a very special moment, as you can imagine, because I had dreamed about it since I was young. And then to actually get my first chance to fly into space was really an emotional time. Our mission, we were the second international microgravity laboratory. And what that means is that in the back of the space shuttle payload bay, instead of having a satellite or something like that, we had a laboratory module called Space Lab. And this is the main way we used to do scientific research in space before we had ISS. We would fly these 2-week shuttle missions with these laboratory modules, and we would conduct scientific investigations, in our case, around the clock in 2 shifts. And by the time we finished our 2-week mission, we had actually accomplished over 80 different scientific investigations. So once you get up into space, you immediately feel different. You feel the environment has changed. First of all, you're floating. It's very strange because everything starts floating as soon as you undo your belts, then you start floating yourself. You're very dizzy because your inner ear, your balance system is very confused. You know, your inner ear system thinks that you're spinning, but your eyes tell you you're not. So that can be very confusing to your brain. You also feel very full-headed, as if you're laying down on an incline or standing on your head, because there's no longer gravity pulling all the fluids down into your legs. And so you can see people's faces look very puffy, especially during the first few days of flight. In fact, during the first few days of flight, your body will eliminate about 2 liters of water. So just think of one of those big water bottles. That's how much less water on average your body carries when you're in orbit. So all this, the dizziness, the fluid shift can cause headaches. It can cause you to feel nauseous, what we call space adaptation syndrome. Everybody gets it to a degree, some more seriously than others. Fortunately, most cases are not very serious, but every now and then you get someone who gets affected very, very seriously. There are also more subtle changes to your body. For example, your red blood cell count goes down, your white blood cell count goes up. We don't really understand why. It might be just the stress of the organism being in a strange environment causing this immune response, but we really don't know for sure. Shortly after returning from my first mission, I got turned around onto my second flight. This time I was flying aboard Space Shuttle Endeavour, and this was the first chance I had to put on the big white spacesuit and go out and lead my first 2 spacewalks, or EVA, extravehicular activity. And what we were doing, we were testing tools and construction techniques that we would later use to actually help build the International Space Station. On my third flight aboard the Space Shuttle Discovery, we were the second major assembly mission of the space station program. And so we flew up to the space station when it was still pretty small. We carried 2 large pieces with us in the shuttle payload bay, the Z1 truss that you can see on the right side of your screen, and then the 3rd pressurized mating adapter you can see on the left side of your screen. We installed those using the robotic arm of the space shuttle to position them over the station. And then over 4 EVAs, 4 spacewalks and 2 teams, we went outside and we physically installed those pieces by bolting them to the structure and then connecting the electrical cables to bring them to life. We also installed the main data link between the space station and the ground. This antenna dish we installed EVA while my partner Bill MacArthur held the 2 pieces together. I used a power tool and I drove 4 bolts to attach the antenna dish. And then we connected the electrical cables and I swung the big boom out and bolted it in place. And even today, all of the video you see coming from the station, all of the experiment data, and some of the vehicle telemetry all go through that dish, that antenna, through the satellite system and back down to the ground into the mission control centers. After the landing of Space Shuttle Discovery, somehow 10 years had gone by. I'd flown 3 space missions, and I was trying to decide what I was going to do next when the chief asked me if I would join the Expedition Corps. And so this is something I hadn't thought very much about before, because until then, my NASA career had been focused mostly on helping to figure out how we were going to build the space station and then participating in that process. Now I was being asked to change a little bit. I was still going to be a flyer, but no longer would I be training to fly a 2-week space shuttle mission to build the station. Now I was being asked to train to live and work aboard the station on what turned out to be a 6.5-month flight. So I did take a few days to think about it. And even after I decided I wanted to accept the challenge to fly to the ISS and stay for 6.5 months. The bigger commitment was actually training. I was going to be training for at least 3.5 years, and half of that time roughly would be in Star City, in Zvyozny. I would have to travel back and forth, 1 month in Zvyozny, 1 month in Houston, back and forth all the time. I had to learn, of course, the Russian language, because not only did I have to learn Russian systems, I had to also function as the flight engineer 1 of the Soyuz spacecraft. And so it was a big commitment, but over 3.5 years of training. But the Russian cosmonauts, of course, had to make the same commitment. They had to spend half of their time here in Houston. They had to learn English for the same reasons. And but we all agreed that these were by far the most rewarding missions of our careers. Of course, I very much enjoyed my experience in Russia. I've always enjoyed international travel, but actually living in the Russian culture was a very enriching experience for me. I made some very good friends, including Vika and Victor, and we still keep in touch today. Salajan, of course, my crewmate, and some of the other cosmonauts, we still keep in touch. And it was just such a nice experience to spend some time and to learn the Russian culture. Of course, some aspects of Russian culture were a little more difficult to learn, but true story, I didn't used to drink very much vodka, but since my Russian experience, it's pretty much all I drink these days. Well, the biomedical effects can be broken down into some major categories. Of course, you have musculoskeletal effects. In the absence of gravity, it has a very negative effect on your muscles and on your bones in your body. You have your circulatory system, your cardiopulmonary, where, being in 0G, your heart doesn't have to work very hard. Your circulatory system can get weak. And so it's very important that we have countermeasures to counteract these negative effects. And of course, we worry about radiation quite a bit. I understand you just had a lecture yesterday about the effects of radiation, both galactic cosmic radiation, as well as solar particles from the sun, on effects on equipment, on electronic equipment in particular. But of course, it also has a negative effect on the human body. So the expedition that I flew with Salajan Sharipov, was the 10th expedition to the ISS. Salajan and I, we trained together for many years, and then we flew together. Salajan, of course, was a Russian Air Force pilot, and he got to fly a lot of the cool airplanes that I read about when I was young. And but even though he was a Russian Air Force officer, ethnically, his family was originally Uzbek, and he was born and raised in neighboring Kyrgyzia. And so, just a piece of trivia, he and I comprised the first all-Asian heritage crew in space. Flying aboard Soyuz was a great experience, very different from Space Shuttle, of course, mostly in size. Of course, Soyuz is quite small, but it is, of course, the most reliable crewed spacecraft ever flown and operated, and it does hold a very special place in my heart. Of course, flying from Kazakhstan was also a very different experience than flying from Florida, from Cape Canaveral, the Kennedy Space Center. Here's Soyuz TMA-5 getting ready for flight, and you can see it's already been fueled. There is liquid oxygen being vented at the base. Here we are climbing the ladder to say goodbye and get into our spacecraft, get into the elevator. Here's the key that actually starts the rocket. And here we go on our way. And, it's a very different experience, like I said, launching aboard shuttle or aboard Soyuz. But in either case, just about 9 minutes, right around 9 minutes to get from the launch pad up into orbit and low Earth orbit to an orbital speed of around 25,000 kilometers per hour. So this was our spacecraft. We flew autonomously for about 2 days to slowly change our orbit to match that of the ISS before we did our approach and docking. Once we got on board, we spent about 9 days with the Expedition 9 crew, and we got them on their way home, and then we added our patch to the line, the 10th expedition, and we began our mission. We set up our work areas, much like you would do here at home, put up some photographs, arranged our computer and our books the way we wanted them. Salajan unpacked some of the friends he brought with him. Of course, it was going to be a long mission. and then we began our 6.5 months in space. So of course, the main purpose of ISS is scientific research. So we did as much of that as we could. But the main purpose of our missions at that time was actually maintenance and repair. And we were flying only about 1.5 years after Space Shuttle Columbia accident. And so back then, using only Russian assets, we could only supply a crew of 2 with the essentials of food, water, and of course, oxygen. So our main purpose was to do the maintenance work, the scheduled maintenance, and then to repair items that broke down. And sometimes it was a challenge because some of the things that broke down were never supposed to break down, but we worked very closely with the mission control centers to make sure that we could keep the station in a state of good repair. Exercise, I mentioned some of the negative effects. Exercise takes care of a lot of the negative effects. Aboard Space Station, we exercise for 2 hours every day, and we have a variety of machines that help us. Of course, we have exercise bicycles, both in the US segment as well as the Russian segment. We also have a treadmill in both segments, and the treadmill, of course, when you're in space, you have to use a harness and rubber bungees to hold you to the track so you don't just float away from it. And we have resistive exercise devices that help us keep our bones and our muscles in shape as well. So we find this to be very effective against a lot of the negative biomedical effects, particularly musculoskeletal and particularly cardiovascular. These exercises help to keep your bones and your muscles in shape, as well as your heart and your lungs. We started discovering some years after operating ISS that there were some vision changes to the human eye on a lot of the people flying long duration missions. And now over 70% of astronauts who fly to the ISS experience some kind of change in their eyesight. And in some cases, they even experience permanent eye damage. And we have some ideas on what might be causing this, but we don't have a solution as of yet. One thing that happened is we put up a new resistive exercise device, and this device is able to achieve very high loads. And so one theory is that, well, when you do weightlifting on the Earth, the pressure in your head goes up, but it's temporary. As soon as you stop lifting, then the pressure equalizes and comes back down to normal. So could something like this be contributing to that effect? Could the higher pressure inside of an astronaut's head be causing some of these eye problems? And we're just not sure. We also looked at our food. Now, the food that we bring up is the same food that we use in the military, at least on the American side. And so if you think about the requirements for food for someone fighting a war, they're very different from an astronaut. If you're fighting a war, you're under stress, you're very active physically, and you need a lot of fat, a lot of calories, a lot of sodium, a lot of salt, right? Because you're sweating and you need to replace the salt. And if you're an astronaut, though, you're just basically floating around, taking it easy and doing some work. But the food requirement is very different. And so there's a lot of salt in this food. And perhaps that is contributing also to the increased pressure in your head, which could be contributing to the eye damage. So one of my favorite experiments aboard the space station was using ultrasound, a remote diagnostic ultrasound equipment. And so Saladin and I participated in these experiments, and including scanning our eyes. And we were able to measure the diameter of the optical nerve sheath, and that is an indication of whether the pressure inside of your head is changing or not. And so now, for many years, astronauts and cosmonauts have their eyes scanned on the ground before launch, and then every few months in space, they also still have their eyes scanned to see if the diameter of that ocular sheath is changing, giving an indication of whether the pressure in their heads are increasing, to see if we can correlate that with changes in your eye performance. What's interesting about this experiment is it's also been used on the ground. The same scientist that developed this technique uses it on the ground with medical students, sending them to developing parts of the world, and using the same technique of remote ultrasound is able to bring this technique to villages in remote areas. And so it's a great example of something developed for spaceflight, helping to make life better for people here on the Earth as well. Well, radiation is one of the main things that we are concerned about for long duration flight. as we talk about flights to Mars or extended flights to the moon, radiation becomes more and more of an important factor. Of course, the obvious solution to radiation is to shield, but it's really not practical to shield spacecraft the way that we shield things here on the Earth. Big lead bricks are impractical. You can't really expect to put these bricks all around your spacecraft. Would be the weight, of course, to launch these things into space would be prohibitive. And, you know, it's very difficult to shield, especially against galactic cosmic radiation, as I'm sure you heard yesterday from the professor that lectured to you. Also, shielding is a very complex problem. Oftentimes, you can make it worse if you shield, because a high energy particle traveling at relativistic speed might pass right through your body without any effect. But if you slow it down, but don't completely stop it, the secondary radiation from exciting the materials in the shield, what we call the bremsstrahlung radiation, can actually be worse for biological systems. And so by shielding, you might actually make the condition worse. So shielding is by no means a simple problem. We do have some shielding aboard the station. In the US crew quarters, we use polyethylene blocks, and those are really good to use because they don't have much secondary radiation effects, and they're good for slowing down protons and other charged particles like that from the sun. This is what our crew quarters look like. Some people also use water bags. You can see those white bags. Those are filled with water, drinking water. And they're used, of course, water is also a very good shielding material because when radiation strikes water molecules, it breaks the molecules apart, but there really is no secondary radiation. So again, water is also a very good shielding material. So on the Earth, we are protected from the charged particles of the sun mostly by the radiation belts around the Earth, the Van Allen belts or the magnetosphere. And so that's why even in low Earth orbit, we are protected mostly from most of the charged particles coming from the sun. So there have been ideas, well, can we create an artificial magnetic field around our spacecraft to protect us? You know, it's an idea that people have talked about, but there are very important practical limitations. One, it would take a lot of power, obviously, to do something like this. And number two, we don't know the effects that creating this field around the spacecraft could have a negative effect on the health of the crew. And so you might actually be creating a new problem rather than solving the old problem. We spend a lot of money on this kind of research, of course. We develop detectors. We want to know the environment as well as we can. But as far as countermeasures for radiation, this is still the state of the art. Big vitamin tablets. So I took one of these every day, big green vitamin tablet, and I'm not sure it did any good. It's supposed to clean up all the free radicals in my blood that were generated from the radiation strikes. But frankly, I think it was more of a make me feel better kind of thing. Psychosocial aspects of long duration spaceflight are also very important. In any kind of expedition under stressful conditions is very important. This is a picture of Robert Falcon Scott and his crew when they were racing Roald Amundsen to the South Pole. And Amundsen won the race, made it to the South Pole first with his team. And so this is Scott and his team on the way returning from the South Pole after their defeat. And you can see that they're having a very difficult time. They had a lot of logistical problems with food and water supplies. And unfortunately, they all perished trying to come back from the South Pole. But you can see the strain on their faces as they took this photograph. This has also happened in space, of course, aboard space stations. There have been situations you can imagine when you're in space for a very long time. There's an excellent book written by a Russian cosmonaut, Valentin Lebedev, called Diary of a Cosmonaut. And he chronicles his time aboard space station and about how tension would build between him and his crewmates. And you know, they would build to a point where sometimes they would maybe go for 1 week without speaking to each other because they were so, you know, so much tension. And so you can imagine on an expedition to Mars or even farther, that this kind of thing will become even more and more important. When you're in a confined area, as we sometimes are discovering here during the pandemic, conflict can happen. You can have disagreements with the people you were close to, and of course, that can lead to depression and all kinds of psychological problems. So these are things that we also worry about when we talk about mounting missions to Mars and things like that, where crews will be together for long periods of time in a very small space. And so we want to make sure we get the right people together, the right team, and we also want to make sure that we have countermeasures so that we don't have people getting into conflicts and have mechanisms to resolve those and to deal with depression as well. So we study a lot of these kinds of things with analogs. And so we have stations, of course, at the North and the South Pole. And we the situation is not exactly the same, but we look at these analogs. This is the Houghton Mars project at the North Pole in the Arctic Circle near the North Pole. Food, of course, plays a big part of your psychological well-being. If you've come home after a difficult day, if you have a nice meal or somebody has prepared you a nice meal, that makes you feel a whole lot better, right? And that's why when the navies that operate the nuclear submarines, who are underwater for long periods of time, they have the best food. They're always given the best food in order to help to keep their spirits up. And so it's actually, there are a lot of aspects of a meal or food that really help psychologically. This is the food that we have. It doesn't look nearly as good as that steak, but it is what we have. And unfortunately for us, during our expedition, we had a food shortage during the first part of our expedition. It seems that our friends on Expedition 9 had eaten our food and had not, somehow the accounting was not kept accurate. And so we had a shortage of food. And even worse, we were starting to be blamed ourselves for eating too much, which was not true. And so it was a difficult situation psychologically for us. We each lost about 3 or 4 kilos, I think. During that time, we had to ration our food for about 4 weeks. And but it was we dealt with it with humor. We would tell jokes to each other. We would ask the mission control centers to send jokes and cartoons up, trying to have a competition for who had the funniest joke. But at the end, we were very happy that on Christmas Day, the resupply ship did arrive and bring us a fresh load of food and, kind of took care of everything. Well, spaceflight, of course, really is a magical experience. It's a life-changing experience. I don't think anyone flies into space without some pretty serious introspection, especially looking at our beautiful Earth and looking out into deep space. You can't help but wonder what life, the meaning of life and what it's all about. Well, after the resupply ship came, we did get our food. We got some treats, of course. EVA, we got to do a couple of Russian EVAs. That was really a special treat for me because I'd become a specialist in using American spacesuits and American tools. And this was a chance to go do Russian EVAs using Russian spacesuits. During our EVAs, we did a number of different things. We installed remote-controlled experiments. We retrieved packages that had been left outside by previous crews. And we installed navigation antennas to guide future cargo ships, arriving cargo ships to the station. Saljan also deployed a nanosat, just a very small satellite, and he did that just by throwing it off the back of the station. Well, our favorite thing to do in space is to look at the Earth and take photographs. On this mission alone, I shot over 16,000 photos of the Earth, so I'd just like to share a few with you. This is looking over the Himalaya Mountains into China. And from our altitude of about 400 kilometers, the Himalaya Mountains look pretty small. But remember, down there somewhere is Mount Everest, the tallest peak on the Earth. Here's a close-up of the Himalayas. Here's some different places from around the world. This is Mecca in Saudi Arabia. The white spot in the middle of your screen, that's the Grand Mosque where the annual pilgrimage is held. Here's Beijing, the capital of China. Light snowfall helping to bring out some detail. The rectangle in the middle, that's the Forbidden City where the old emperors used to live. Here's New York City. You can see a lot of detail here. Central Park, skyscrapers. You can see boats in the east in the Hudson Rivers. Here's Moscow. in oblique, you can see the rings around the ring roads around Moscow. You can see the Moscow River, of course, running through the city. Here's an area in North Central Africa, very interesting texture, very beautiful place. Here are the Bahamas. Blues and greens of the Bahamas are unlike anywhere in the world, very, very bright. Here's Cape Cod in sunglint. You can see using this technique with the sun angle, you can see the difference in the waves on the left side and the right side of the photographs. Here are the Finger Lakes area of upstate New York. Southern tip of Florida. Again, the blues and greens are just very beautiful. Here are glaciers in Patagonia in Argentina. Here are the Great Pyramids at Giza. You can see the two big ones clearly. If you look down from the two big ones, you can see the third smaller one. And if you look to the left of the third smaller one, you can make out the outline of the Sphinx. Here's an area in the Ukraine, some interesting green colors there. I'm not sure what's going on, but very beautiful. This is a close-up of the Sahara Desert in Algeria. Intricate patterns in the sand dunes. Mother Nature shows her beauty in many different ways. Here's one of my favorites. This is Lake Nasser in sunglint. I was able to catch this photograph when the sun was reflecting at just the right angle, almost perfectly off the water into the camera lens. This is what it really looked like out the window just for a moment, and I was able to take this picture. Of course, Mother Nature sometimes is just funny. I saw this one day in January. I got a camera and had the perfect thing to send to my wife for Valentine's Day. Well, 6.5 months was about up. It was time to start preparing to come home. The Russian Mission Control Center asked us to put our pressure suits back on to make sure they still fit, because in space with no gravity, your spine relaxes and you actually get about 2 or 3 centimeters taller. And so they have to accommodate that for that when they build your suit. Here I am on the right side of Soyuz during entry, and this is about 45 minutes before we came back to Earth. Well, Space Shuttle, of course, had wings. So once we got into the thicker part of the atmosphere, we'd turn into an airplane and we would glide down and land on a runway like a conventional airplane. In the case of capsule spacecraft like Soyuz, we had come down under a parachute. But even under the parachute, you're falling very fast, still about 8 meters every second. And so as you can see in the center panel, 1 meter off the ground, 6 solid rocket motors fire to slow you down just before you hit the Earth. But then on the right side, you can see you still hit the Earth pretty hard. We have other shock absorbing mechanisms. So when all of that works, you hit the ground pretty hard, but it doesn't really hurt, at least not too much. As sometimes happens, we tipped over, which made it even less comfortable. But of course, the rescue forces were right on top of us. They were following us down in their helicopters. They got us out of the spacecraft in about 20 minutes, sat us down in lawn chairs, handed us telephones, satellite telephones, so we could call our families and let them know that we were safe. After a quick ceremony in Kazakhstan, we got back on the airplanes. We flew back to Star City. There we were reunited with our families. And finally, this is the picture I want to leave you with. This is one of my favorite pictures from space. This, of course, is the moon. I shot this photo using the long lens from the space station. It was the moon that had started my dreams all those years ago of becoming an astronaut myself. On the left side, Mother Earth, home planet to all of us. And that blue in the middle is what I want to bring to your attention. That was what was most surprising to me the first time I flew into space. I was just taken aback by how beautiful and colorful our Earth is. And then I saw that our sunlight, the sunlight passing through the air of our atmosphere, causes it to glow these beautiful shades of blue. And so this photograph to me says dreams, and that's where it begins, right? And you all know, you young students, you know that this is where it starts, having a dream, having a passion. And so I encourage all of you to think about what you'd like to do with your careers and your lives. Start with that dream. Of course, it takes hard work. It takes perseverance, takes a lot of other things, but it starts with that dream. And so that's what I'd like to leave you with. So with that, I'd like to thank you for your attention. and then invite your questions that I'll try to answer. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Leroy. Please, question, guys.
Oh, hi. Can we? Oh, just kidding.
Please.
Oh, hi. I'm Kelly Graham. I'm a student from the University of Houston, and my goal actually is to become a flight surgeon, and practice aerospace medicine.
Right.
I just wanted to ask, in regards to one of the earlier things that you mentioned about like having less red blood cells and more white blood cells, could an explanation for that possibly be due to like the differences in like gravity affecting cell differentiation, in like low Earth orbit or something like that?
It could be. I mean, you're probably more informed than I am about the possibility of something like that. But you know, it might be something like that. There could be a gravity effect. It could be the enhanced radiation environment. It could be just, you know, your body's under stress, or you're under stress because you're in such a weird place that causes that. We don't really know, but it's very interesting. You know, a lot of research is necessary in the biomedical field. There are a lot of that is actually the biggest technical challenge before we can send anyone to a place like Mars, is how are we going to keep astronauts healthy during the journey, and then during the stay on the surface, and then the return.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. More questions? I didn't realize you were there. Are you all Americans over there? I thought it was all Russian students, but the all Americans?
No.
Or a mix?
Okay. Excuse me. Good evening, sir. My name is Fedor. I'm from Bauman University. And the question is that I have, is this true that a person born and raised on Moon would on average be taller than an Earthling? And if such a person has decided to go to Earth, what health problem he might encounter?
I think that if you started having children on the Moon, that evolution would bring you to the point where things would start changing, but I think it would take some time. One of the experiments we did on my very first mission, we had Japanese red-bellied newts, and we had embryos. We had, you know, eggs, as well as live newts on the space shuttle mission. And the reason we use those, or the researchers use those newts, is because the life cycle, or the gestation cycle, is very quick. And so we actually had, you know, we could actually study the development of the embryos. And so what we found, interestingly, what the researchers found, is that the zero G did not affect them at all. And so but I think over time, evolution would cause changes to happen. So, you know, there's speculation that if we did have, you know, babies on the Moon over many generations, that possibly because of the reduced gravity environment, they'd be taller, their bones might be weaker, their muscles might be weaker, and so they might not be able to tolerate. Eventually, you might get to the point after many generations of evolution that they might not be able to tolerate being actually on the Earth. And so it's the kind of thing where it's an interesting question. We don't know the answers for sure. We don't know how quickly or how slowly things would change, the evolution would occur, but it's an interesting to think about.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Hello, sir. My name is Chloe Tovar. I'm also from the University of Houston, like Kelly. So I have some food allergies. I'm allergic to peanuts, and because of that, I've kind of like ruled out any time in the military because of the food that they give them. Have you had any experience with like fellow astronauts or cosmonauts that have food allergies and have had to have like restricted types of food for them? How would that work? Because I know that some peanut allergies are so bad you can't be in the same room.
Right. I really don't know much. I don't personally know of any astronauts or cosmonauts who had food allergies, and I don't know what the policy is for either NASA or for you know, Roscosmos. And so, you know, that'd be a great question for one of the flight surgeons. Maybe you'll have a flight surgeon talk to you, and he or she would be the one to answer that question. I don't know what the restrictions are. As far as the food goes, of course, you can select your menu, but I don't know how tightly they screen for items like peanuts in particular and other things like that, you know, but I'm sure that accommodations could be made because, you know, we're able to make accommodations in other places here on the Earth, but I just don't know what the policy is for the different space agencies.
Okay, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Patrick, please.
Hi, I'm Patrick Gomes from Bauman State Technical University. I would like to ask you, what did you find to be the most inconvenient thing on board the space station while you were staying there? It could be a psychological thing or a physical thing.
Well, during the space station missions, the psychological part is not too bad because, of course, we have the beautiful Earth to look at and photograph. We have very good connectivity electronically with our friends and our families. And so it's really not bad. I think it would be much more difficult to go to a place like Mars where, you know, not suddenly, but gradually the time delay in communication would start becoming more and more, and you would watch the Earth get smaller and smaller and turn into a star. So psychologically, I think that would be a very different situation, much more tough. As far as the flights aboard MKS or aboard ISS, the most difficult things to do operationally, well, they're everyday things. I mean, think about how you brush your teeth, right? So you have a bag of water, you take some water, you brush your teeth. Okay, now what? You don't have a sink, you can't spit your toothpaste. And so, you know, you could spit it into a tissue, but now you have this wet tissue. So now you have to do something with that. And so what I did for 6.5 months is I just swallowed my toothpaste. And so, you know, everyday things like that. How do you clip your fingernails, you know, without fingernails flying everywhere?
Mm-hmm.
You know, so the way I did it, I took a piece of tape and I put it on the wall, and I always did this near the air filter, and then I carefully clipped each nail and put it on the tape, you know. And of course, using the toilet, you have to be very careful doing that. It's much more complicated than doing it here on the ground where you have gravity to help you. In space, of course, the space toilets work very well, especially the Russian space toilet works very well, using airflow to collect everything. But of course, accidents do happen, and you know, everyone is responsible for cleaning up their own mess.
Right, I see. Thank you very much.
Any more questions?
Hello. Oh,
No,
Go ahead.
Curtis, go ahead.
okay. My name is Curtis. I'm from Southwestern Oklahoma State University.
Uh-huh.
And I was wondering, how would we go about dealing with severe physical trauma? Let's say because of the lower bone density from being up there for a long time, we break a bone, it shatters in our arm or something, and there's a lot of internal bleeding and it needs surgery. What then?
Right. So we are all trained, you know, to be it's kind of like paramedic training. I spent several nights in the emergency room in the Texas Medical Center, working alongside emergency room doctors, learning how to stabilize patients, put IV lines in, do things like that, do sutures. And so we train for all those things, and we do very careful aboard the station to not have sharp edges that you could run into and cause an injury. But of course, we do worry about that kind of injury, especially if you're doing spacewalks, you're changing pressure. So you have the possibility of barotrauma, you know, of blowing out your eardrums or your sinuses, you know, some kind of damage to your sinuses. And so we're very aware of all the different things that can happen. And aboard a space station, it's not too bad because we have quite a lot of equipment and pharmaceuticals on board. And we also have near continuous communication with the doctors on the ground. So if there is a problem, then we can deal with it pretty well. And in the worst case, in the very worst case, we can all get in the spacecraft and come back to Earth. When you're on your way to Mars, that's a different story, right? You can't abort the mission and come back. You don't have the fuel to turn around. And so that becomes a much more important thing. As far as trauma, we do have, you know, things on board to take care of trauma, stabilize a patient. And like I said, in the very worst case, we can bring the patient back down to the ground. So we have methods in place aboard the space station. The bigger question would be for a mission to Mars, what would you do?
I don't know how accurate this is, but one of the articles I read once before had stated because of the 0G, there's issues with blood won't clot. And so like when people get cut, they just continuously bleed. Is that
that's
accurate, or
not
is that
true. I mean, we've had little cuts in space before, and of course we do finger pricks to get blood samples, you know, for analysis during our medical checks, things like that. And so it actually does clot. That's not a problem. What's interesting is anecdotally, it just seems like little cuts take longer to heal in space, and we're not really sure why. We don't know if it has to do with, you know, the changes in your immune system, or possibly just dust in the environment floating around, kind of keeping the wound from healing as fast. We really don't understand why, but just anecdotally, we've never measured it, but just people seem to get the impression that little cuts on your hands take longer to heal.
Thank you.
Sure, thank you.
I could go about this for like another hour, so I'll let somebody else have a question.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Chow, can you please tell me if you have any joint experiments on biomedical experiments with Russia?
Let's see, joint biomedical experiments. So I'm trying to think, what did we do? I guess we didn't really have any truly joint experiments where we had American and Russian investigators on one particular experiment during my mission. But of course, there's a lot of data sharing. And so I mentioned the ultrasound experiment that we did, the space telemedicine. That was an American experiment. And then, of course, on both sides, when we did our checks, our medical checks, we had Russian equipment that would do the blood analysis. We had American equipment that would do other measurements. And I know the doctors shared the information with each other, you know, the American and Russian doctors. And so, you know, we did have a lot of cooperation in that regards, but I don't think we had any specific biomedical experiments that were truly joint.
Okay, thank you. And I'm giving the word to Amanda. Amanda, please.
Hi, Dr. Chow. First of all, I just wanted to say I took your space environments class in 2015 as a race.
Oh, okay, great.
So, hi, good to see you again.
Yeah, nice to see you.
Yeah, and my question is, can you talk a little bit about the recovery time once you come back to Earth for space shuttle, your 2-week mission versus a 6-week mission for ISS?
Sure. Now the effects are similar. The symptoms are similar, right? Going up and coming down. Coming down, it's a similar symptoms to going up, very dizzy, because even after a short shuttle mission of 1 or 2 weeks, your brain forgets what to do with the signals coming from your inner ear. And so it takes a couple of days after a shuttle mission to kind of get your balance back and feel like you're kind of back to normal. In the case of a 6.5-month flight or 6-month flight, same symptoms, but the recovery takes a longer period of time, you know, which was not surprising. But most crews take 2 or 3 weeks at least to recover. My crew, we actually recovered very quickly. We recovered in about a week. And that's because I think that's because we took the exercise very seriously before, during, and after. When you come down, all you want to do is lay around, because if you lay down, you're not dizzy, you know, but you have to force yourself to get up and walk, because, you know, even though it may make you feel a little nauseous, you have to get your balance back. And then once you start getting your balance back, if you can start exercising and you know, running and lifting weights, things like that, then your recovery speeds up quite a bit. And in some cases, crews have taken over 4 weeks to recover, but that's a little unusual. It's more 2 or 3 weeks. But yeah, definitely much longer recovery time after a long flight.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Any more questions?
Hello, sir. My name is Baujov from Bauman University. My question is, what do you think? What medicine should eat lunar missions astronauts to reduce the radiation impacts?
To reduce what impacts?
Radiation impacts.
Oh, radiation impacts. Well, you know, of course, radiation, the damage to the body comes in 2 major forms. One is, of course, the disruptions to DNA and increasing the chance of cancer down the road. The other, of course, is dissociating the water molecules in your body and then having them reform as free radicals, reforming to cause your blood to become more acidic and causing damage to your tissues and inflammation and things like that. So you have the acute and then the longer term damage from the radiation. As far as medicines, I'm not aware of any real advances we've made in what kind of preventive medicines that we can take aboard. Like I said, aboard space station, we take that vitamin pill, that big green vitamin pill. It's supposed to help clean up the free radicals, but it might be more of a placebo than anything. And you know what, my personal belief, or, you know, I'm not based on any research, I think we will find that there are people with genetics, there has to be some kind of genetic markers where people are more able to tolerate and their bodies are more able to repair the radiation damage. And an example or an analogy I would use is smoking. So we all know people who maybe smoked a lot of cigarettes in their lives and they still had no health problems. They still lived a very long time without a problem. Then there are other people who maybe just smoked for a little while, quit, but then they still developed health problems. So I think in the same way, I think some people are just genetically, you know, better at handling smoke. And I think there are people who are going to be genetically better at handling radiation. Of course, we don't know the markers for those yet, but I think we'll probably find them.
Okay. You mentioned about ethylene blocks to reduce the radiation. Can you describe more a little about these blocks?
Yeah, the polyethylene blocks are just, it's just, you know, the polyethylene, just the plastic, clear plastic blocks. And the reason that these are effective shields is that if you use something like lead or a high, you know, a dense metal, a lot of secondary radiation comes off if a cosmic ray or if an iron atom traveling at high relativistic speeds hits it, then it's going to have a lot of secondary radiation. And so the reason the polyethylene and the water are effective shields is because they really don't generate, the material itself does not generate any secondary, the bremsstrahlung radiation, right? And so on the Earth, we can use big, thick lead blocks, for example, in the medical field for radiation treatment, because we understand what radiation we're putting out and we can stop entirely all the radiation of the secondary radiation just by using these big, thick blocks. The only other shielding that we know works is about 1 meter of soil, of dirt, or regolith on the moon, you know, or Martian soil. If you can bury your habitat underneath 1 meter of dirt, then that will stop all the galactic cosmic radiation as well as all the solar particles. And so, you know, if you can put your spacecraft inside a big dirt ball, which is not practical, then, you know, that would stop the radiation. Otherwise, you know what, I have a feeling, well, it's such a complex problem. My opinion is that we're not going to solve it. So we're just going to have to send crews to Mars and see what happens to them. You know, and these crews are going to have to sign some kind of medical release acknowledging that they're going to take this risk. And, you know, I don't know. It's, I think it's too complex of a problem that we'll never really get a handle on it. So we're just going to have to collect data and try it.
Mm-hmm. Okay, one last question, but it's a little bit personal question for you. Can you answer? How many languages can you speak?
Oh, that's not too personal. So I was born in the US. My parents were both from China originally. So I spoke Chinese. I learned Chinese, Mandarin Chinese, and English at home simultaneously as a baby. And then I learned Russian, of course. I took a little bit of German in high school, so I could speak a few words of German, but I don't really say I can speak German. So mostly 3 languages, English, Chinese, Mandarin Chinese, and Russian.
Okay, because I was born in Russia, so I can speak Russian and Chinese with my family.
Yeah, okay, great, great. And your English is good too. So we're about the same.
Yeah.
Although your Russians, I'm sure your Russians and your Chinese are better than mine. And maybe my English is a little better than yours, but.
Yeah, I think so. Thanks a lot, sir.
Thank you.
If no one else has any questions, I was going to ask another biomedical question. But I was going to ask, so in talking about relating to radiation and like cancer and stuff like that, do you think the risk for cancer changes due to space radiation changes depending on the type of tissue in the human body? So like, for example, skin is exposed to much higher levels of like radiation, well, potentially than like internal tissue.
Sure.
So would astronauts be more likely to see changes on like their skin than internally?
That's that's a great question. I'm not sure about the answer, but I do know that of course different kinds of radiation affect different organs in the body differently, right? And so, for example, you have the ionizing radiation is going to affect more fatty areas of the body much more seriously than otherwise. And so we have what we call capture cross sections, where we characterize different organs and what kind of energies or particles are they more likely to absorb than others, and what different types of radiation. And so characterizing the radiation environment is important, but overall, I think it's such a complex problem, it's very difficult to say. But because of some of the generalities that we know, that's why we have different radiation standards for men and women. Women tend to have, especially in breast tissue, things like that. Of course, there's more fatty tissue. And so that's more susceptible to a lot of the radiation that we're exposed to. And so because of that, the limits are a little bit different. So anyone you send to Mars, I think are going to, be it men or women, are going to be older people, because then they have a less likely chance of developing cancer in their remaining lifetime than perhaps dying of some other kind of, disease. So I think what we're going to see is when we do send crews to Mars, they will be older people. My guess it will be a mix of men and women. That makes sense to me. Not everyone. That's a debatable question. But to me, it makes sense to send an older crew, experienced older crew of mixed gender, and then we're just going to have to take data and see how they do.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah, you're welcome. All right, looks like we're at an hour. I don't want to hold you up on your next event, which might be dinner.
Okay, but Leroy, can you please just for one more question, Matilda,
sure, yeah.
She wanted to.
Sure.
Hello, Mister. I'm Matilda.
Echo.
Yes.
Again.
Second.
Matilda, maybe you can write,
okay.
type your questions.
We are through with the microphone. Just sorry.
You have a speaker that's on over there or something? Maybe we can mute the speaker.
Well, it's okay. We are some students together, and so there was one microphone that was on. I'm Matilda. I'm from Switzerland, and you talked about headaches and some problems that have the astronauts at the beginning when they're on the ISS. And I read somewhere that because of the, I don't know, maybe of the different environment, that the astronauts had a hard time thinking when they are on the ISS at the beginning, because maybe of the dizziness, or I don't know. Is that right, or is that?
Yeah. So I missed part of it. So you said something about the heart. You mean the heart or the headache?
No, the brain, that they had heart, that it was difficult for them to think and to make decisions.
Oh yes. There have been a number of astronauts who said that it's difficult for them. They seem to have more difficulty thinking in space. I did not personally have that experience, but several astronauts have said that they seem to be more forgetful, or they seem to, they felt like they weren't very smart. And so several astronauts have said that. And of course, recent research has shown some structural changes to the brain when you're in orbit. And, in some cases, there's some loss of the gray matter, of the white matter, in your brain. And so similar to what you see sometimes in mountain climbers, you go to very high altitudes with no oxygen or little oxygen. And so we're not sure what's going on, but that could, of course, contribute. And, if you have some changes in your brain, that could, of course, affect your cognitive abilities. And so that's just a great example of how little we know about the biomedical effects. Is it the microgravities, is it the lack of gravity causing these structural changes? Is it the radiation environment, which is higher, but not that much higher than being on the Earth? Or is it a combination of those effects or something else? We really just don't know. And so there's a lot of, again, this kind of shows you how much opportunity there is for research work in space biomedicine.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Ну что, на сегодня вопросы завершим, да?
And
Хороший
I
рабочий
believe
день.
enough questions for today. We had a good work day.
Прекрасный, и интересный, и познавательный.
It was interesting and informative.
Well, thank you all very much. I wish you all the very best of luck. I'm glad we were able to continue this year, although virtually, just we're doing everything virtually. And I wish you all the very best and hope we can all meet face to face again soon.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you very much, Leroy. It was great seeing you.
Thank you. Thank you. Enjoy your evening.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Have a good day. Bye-bye.
Have a good day.